America didn't forget Black Wall Street. It buried it on purpose. They told you it was a riot. It was a massacre. They told you it was racial tension. It was a coordinated economic hit. Let's start where all real betrayals begin, with a lie so big everybody's scared to touch it. In 1921, Greenwood, Tulsa wasn't a black neighborhood. It was a problem for white bankers who couldn't control the money, a problem for white businessmen who couldn't touch the profits, a problem for a system that needed black people poor, desperate, and dependent. Greenwood was none of that. You had black doctors running their own practices, black lawyers handling serious cases, black women owning boarding houses, salons, restaurants, black men with oil leases, real estate, and stock. They called it Negro Wall Street, later Black Wall Street. But understand, this wasn't just about pride. It was about power. Money that doesn't need permission is dangerous, and Greenwood had too much of it. Let's paint it plain. Picture a 35-block district, brick buildings, shops stacked on shops, jazz clubs lit at night, hotels owned by black families, a 54-room luxury hotel, the Stratford Hotel, run by a black man who dared to dream in concrete and brick, doctors, dentists, newspaper offices, grocery stores, tailors, a damn bus system, not aspiring, operating. While white Tulsa still had mud streets and wooden shacks, Greenwood had pianos, chandeliers, and people wearing tailored suits on a Tuesday. This wasn't black folks getting by. This was black folks thriving without them. And that's the part they don't like you to sit with. Because if we did it once, we can do it again. And if we can do it again, their whole story about pull yourself up starts to look like what it is, a rigged game where the dealer burns your winning hand. So how do you destroy a place like that? You don't argue with it. You don't outcompete it. You don't negotiate with it. You criminalize it. You demonize it. And then you burn it. But to do that, you need a spark, a story, a lie. Enter the elevator. May 30th, 1921. Tulsa. A 19-year-old black shoe shiner named Dick Rowland. A 17-year-old white elevator operator named Sarah Page. He walks into the Drexel building to use the colored restroom on the top floor. Elevator doors open. He steps in. What happens next is the part they always turn into fog. Some say he tripped. Some say he brushed against her. Some say they knew each other. What we know is this: she screamed. He ran. By the end of the day, the story wasn't a scare in an elevator. It was black boy assaults white girl. In America, in 1921, that's not a rumor. That's a death sentence. And not just for him, for everybody who looks like him. The next morning, the headline hit like a match. Nab Negro for attacking girl in elevator. That was enough. No trial, no facts, no evidence, just a headline and white imagination. The most dangerous combination on this soil. They arrested Rowland, locked him in the courthouse jail. Now here's where the betrayal gets surgical. The white papers didn't just report, they incited. One of them, the Tulsa Tribune, ran an afternoon editorial. The title is Lost, conveniently, but witnesses remembered the message. Lynch him. Not maybe, not allegedly, a call to action. Then something even stranger. That page of the paper, gone from the archives. The original printing plate, gone. Like it never existed. And you don't erase what's harmless. You erase what's incriminating. By that evening, a white mob started forming outside the courthouse. They weren't there for justice. They were there for a body. Sheriff McCullough claimed he was trying to prevent a lynching. He stationed deputies. He blocked the elevators. He refused to hand Rowland over. But that's not the full picture. Because while white Tulsa was gathering with guns, so was Greenwood. And this is where the story gets twisted on purpose. Word reached Greenwood. They're going to lynch Dick. You have to understand the mood. These weren't just concerned citizens. These were black men who fought in World War I. Men who had seen Europe, seen combat, seen what it meant to fight and come home to Jim Crow spitting in their face. They still had their uniforms. Some still had their rifles. They had seen enough lynched bodies. They knew the script. So about 25, 30 armed black men, many veterans, walked up to that courthouse and did what free men do. They offered to help defend the prisoner. The sheriff told them to leave. They left, but the white mob didn't. It swelled. Hundreds, then over 1,000. Liquor, guns, rage, and beneath it all, envy. Envy of the suits those black men wore, envy of the cars they drove, envy of the life they built. You can hear it in the way white witnesses later talked about Greenwood. Those had no right living better than us. That's the line under everything. As the mob grew, Rumors got louder. They're bringing more Ez with guns. They're coming to start trouble. They're going to attack us. Notice the flip. The ones defending against a lynching became the aggressors. Classic projection, classic justification. Around 10 p.m., a second group of about 75 armed black men came back to the courthouse. This time, they weren't just offering help. They were making a statement. We're not letting you hang him. That's when it happened. A white man tried to disarm a black veteran. Hand on the gun. Struggle. A shot. Nobody knows who fired first, but after that first crack, the night broke open. Gunfire, screams, bodies dropping. The white mob scattered at first, then regrouped. Now they had what they wanted, a story. See? The NS are rising up. We're under attack. We have to defend ourselves. The lie was locked in. Understand what that one moment did. It turned Greenwood from successful black district into black insurrection zone in the eyes of white Tulsa. That's the betrayal, not just of one boy in an elevator, not just of a community, a betrayal of truth itself, because from that point forward, every act of white violence would be called order. Every act of black self-defense would be called riot. Language is the first weapon, guns come second. While the white mob armed itself, something else was happening in the shadows. Phone calls, whispers, deputized men being handed guns and badges. The city didn't just lose control, it chose a side. White men were sworn in as special deputies and told to get a gun and get a yin. That's not rumor, that's on record. This wasn't chaos, it was mobilization. You don't deputize chaos, you direct it. Meanwhile, in Greenwood, families were standing at their windows, listening, watching the glow of downtown, hearing the distant shots. Some had no idea what was coming, others did. They'd seen this movie before, in East St. Louis, in Atlanta, in Springfield. White rage, plus black success, blood. They just didn't know how far Tulsa was willing to go. Spoiler, all the way. Here's the part that stings. Some black folks trusted the system. They believed in the law, in the sheriff, in the courts. They thought they wouldn't destroy all this, not after all we've built, not over one boy. That's the soft edge of betrayal, when you still think the house might spare you while it's stacking wood around your door. Greenwood didn't know it yet, but the decision to erase them had already been made. The elevator was just the excuse. The lie was just the cover, the real crime. They had built a black world that didn't need white approval, and in 1921 America, that was unforgivable. Next, the sky turns against them. Planes, fire, law turned predator. The massacre doesn't start with dawn. It starts before that. In the quiet hours when a city decides which lives are flammable. This was not an accident. It was a message. And they tried to erase both. They didn't just burn a neighborhood. They burned evidence. Let's walk slow through the crime scene. Evidence. What they didn't want on record. After the smoke cleared, Tulsa looked like a war zone. Not a riot. Not a disturbance. A coordinated assault. White mobs. Deputized on the spot. Given guns by the city. Planes dropping incendiaries from above. Snipers in windows. Machine guns on hills. This wasn't chaos. This was strategy. Over 35 city blocks. Gone. More than 200 homes. Burned. Black-owned hotels. Theaters. Law offices. Grocery stores. Barbershops. Tailors. Doctors' offices. Churches. Wiped. But here's the part they don't teach. They arrested the victims. Not the attackers. Over 6,000 black residents were rounded up at gunpoint, detained in internment camps at the fairgrounds, the convention hall, baseball parks. To leave, you needed a white person to vouch for you. Your humanity had to be co-signed. Meanwhile, the white men who set the fires went home, slept in their beds. No mass arrests, no manhunts, no national outrage. Insurance companies, they pulled out the fine print like a guillotine. The riot clause. 2 words that turned wealth into ash on paper. Black families who paid faithfully for years were told, sorry, this was a riot. We don't owe you a dime. So let's be clear. The city allowed the mob. The police armed the mob. The planes flew over with no interference. The National Guard came late and disarmed black residents first. The insurance companies refused to pay. The courts backed the denials. The state stayed quiet. That's not an accident. That's a system operating at full power. And when you see the pattern, you understand. The goal wasn't only to destroy Greenwood. The goal was to make sure it never rose again. And that's where the erasure begins. During Erasure, how they tried to delete a massacre. You know what's more sinister than violence? Silence. For decades, Tulsa 1921 wasn't called a massacre. It was called a race riot. 3 syllables that flip the script. Riot suggests 2 sides, equal blame. Like black folks woke up and said, let's go burn our own hospitals and businesses today. Words are weapons. They use language like bleach. Newspapers that helped spark the violence. Some issues conveniently missing. The infamous editorial in the Tulsa Tribune that may have called for a lynching. The original copy, gone. Microfilm, that frame, missing. City leaders didn't talk about it. Schools didn't teach it. History books skipped it. Survivors were told, don't bring it up. Let it go. Don't stir trouble. Some were threatened. Some were fired for speaking. Some were beaten into silence. So you had elders with memories like open wounds, living in the same city that tried to pretend the stabbing never happened. Imagine that. You're a child. Your grandmother stares out a window at night and goes quiet. You ask why. She says, nothing, I'm fine. But her hands tremble. You grow up never knowing that she watched planes drop fire, never knowing she stepped over bodies in the street, never knowing she saw her father shot for defending his home. That's how generational trauma works when it's wrapped in enforced silence. The pain passes down, the story doesn't. Even the land tried to tell the truth. Mass graves, unmarked, rumored for decades, dismissed as folklore. It took nearly a century for investigations to begin, for ground-penetrating radar, for officials to finally say, maybe there might be something here. Something. Not bodies, not victims. Something. Language again. Always soft where it should be sharp. And think about the timing. 1921 massacre. But the official state commission to investigate, not formed until 1997, 76 years later. That's not delay, that's strategy. You wait until most witnesses are dead, most records are gone, most memory is blurred, then you study it. By the time they're ready to acknowledge it, the people who lived it are almost all in the ground. No living memory, no living claims, no living demands. Neat, efficient, cold. And this isn't just Tulsa, Rosewood, Florida, Colfax, Louisiana, Elaine, Arkansas, Wilmington, North Carolina. Same pattern, violence, theft, erasure. Ask yourself, how many riots were really massacres? How many disputes were really land grabs? How many lost records were really shredded evidence? Tulsa is not an exception. Tulsa is a blueprint. Stolen innovations. What Black Wall Street really proved. Now we get to the part they really hate, because if Greenwood was just some poor black neighborhood that got burned, that's tragic. Sad story. Cue the violins. But that's not what it was. Greenwood was proof. Proof that the lie was a lie. The lie that black people were incapable of self-governance, of business, of wealth, of civilization. But in Tulsa, you had black doctors performing advanced surgeries, black lawyers winning cases, black entrepreneurs running multi-story hotels and theaters, black pilots, black real estate developers, black women owning beauty schools, salons, property. This was not just survival. This was innovation. They built an internal credit system, community-based lending before community banking was trendy, cooperative economics before buy black hashtags, vertical integration, black-owned supply chains feeding black-owned businesses. You had a dollar circulating inside Greenwood for weeks before it left. That's economic genius. That's strategy. And that scared the hell out of people, because if black folks could do that in the shadow of Jim Crow, with laws against them, banks against them, police against them, media against them, then what excuse did white supremacy have left? What story could it tell? Understand this. Racism is not just hatred. It's a business, model, a hierarchy, an economic system. And Greenwood was a glitch in that system, a living contradiction. So what do you do with a contradiction? You remove it, or you rewrite it. They did both. They burned the buildings, but they also stole the blueprint. Look around today. Opportunity zones built on neighborhoods once redlined and bombed. Gentrification strategies that look suspiciously like remove the people, keep the land. Wealth building models that mirror what black communities did under segregation, but now branded as innovative urban economics. Black Wall Street was doing community development before foundations, impact investing before venture capital buzzwords, social entrepreneurship before TED Talks. Who studied them? Who copied them? Who profited? And here's the darkest part. When you erase the story, you erase the source. So when black youth today are told, you're not building anything new, you're always behind, you're always catching up, they're being lied to twice. First lie, that they're not capable. Second lie, that they've never done it before. But Greenwood was a complete economic ecosystem. Circulation, ownership, production, service, culture, education, health. That's not just a neighborhood, that's a model. Now imagine if that model had spread, if there were 10, 20, 50 Black Wall Streets, linked, trading, investing in each other. Imagine a 100-year head start on black capital, uninterrupted, compounding. Instead, what did we get? Burned deeds, stolen land, blocked insurance claims, no reparations, no systemic accountability. But we did get one thing, silence. They stole the wealth. Then they stole the memory of the wealth. Then they stole the idea that the wealth ever existed. That's triple theft, material, historical, psychological. And this is where the danger comes in. Because once you remember, once you really see it, you stop asking permission. You stop believing the script that says black progress is new, black excellence is rare, black wealth is an anomaly. No, black wealth was targeted. Black excellence was hunted. Black innovation was copied, then buried. Tulsa is not just a tragedy, it's a confession. The system confessed what it feared most, independent black power, and that's why they tried to bury it. Under lies, under paperwork, under unmarked graves, under carefully curated silence. But the thing about buried things is they don't disappear. They wait, in the ground, in the bloodline, in the stories that somehow survive, whispered at kitchen tables. In part 3, we're going to dig deeper into that silence. We're going to pull receipts on the land, the money, the policies, and we're going to ask a question they really don't like. What does justice look like when the crime scene is 100 years old and still active? Evidence never sleeps. People do. Let's walk back into Greenwood like it's a crime scene. Because it is. Not metaphorically, legally, financially, physically. The smoke cleared, the bodies were buried, but the paper trail, that's the ghost that never left. Evidence. The ledgers don't lie after the massacre. Insurance companies got busy, not paying, denying. Black families filed over $1.8 million. In insurance claims, that's 1921 money. Adjusted today, you're staring at just tens of millions. Some estimates push it into the hundreds of millions. When you factor compound growth. And what did the insurance companies say? Riot exclusion clause, civil unrest, act of God. Imagine that. White mobs burn your house, loot your store, drop bombs from planes, and they call it God. They used riot clauses the same way they use qualified immunity today, built-in escape hatches, pre-planned excuses. But here's the part they don't like you to see. Police reports show white deputized mobs, eyewitness accounts, describe planes dropping incendiaries, newspaper clippings. From white-owned papers bragged about teaching Negroes a lesson. That's not a riot. That's a coordinated attack. And the city? They saw dollar signs. Right after the massacre, Tulsa officials tried to pass new fire ordinances. Suddenly, the land where black people's homes once stood was declared unsafe. Not because of the mob, because of building codes. Translation: we burned you out. Now we're going to zone you out. They pushed a plan to turn Greenwood into an industrial district. No more Black Wall Street, just warehouses and white-owned businesses. Only reason it didn't fully work? Black folks lawyered up. A black attorney named B.C. Franklin set up a tent office in the ruins and fought those ordinances in court. In the ashes, literally. He won that battle, but losing the war was already in motion, because while they were rebuilding with bare hands and borrowed hope, the real theft was happening in bank vaults, title offices, and courthouses. Yurdesh, land, the Quiet Heist. Let's talk. Land titles. Before the massacre, black Tulsans owned homes, boarding houses, businesses, churches, entire blocks. Some of that land came from freedmen of the 5 civilized tribes. Black people tied to native nations by treaty, given land after emancipation, on paper. But on paper in America is always temporary when you're black. After the massacre, many survivors were displaced, traumatized, locked in internment camps, forced to wear green tags to move around the city. While they were being contained, land deals were being made. Abandoned property suddenly became available. Taxes still ran. Notices accidentally never reached the owners. You don't have to steal land with a gun. You can steal it with a deadline. Miss a tax payment because your house is ash and your family's missing? County takes it. Auctioned off. New white owner. Clean title. That's how you turn a massacre into a real estate opportunity. The same city that failed to protect Greenwood profited from its destruction. Chesh, money, the compound interest of a crime. Think like a banker for a second. Cold, detached, numbers only. A black businessman in Greenwood loses. A hotel worth $25,000 in 1921. A store worth $10,000. Inventory worth $5,000. That's $40,000 in 1921. You invest that at a modest average return over 100 years, you're in the damn multi-millions. Now multiply that by hundreds of families. Generational wealth vaporized in 24 hours, not by bad choices, by white policy and white violence working hand in hand. Then add this: no insurance payout, no government restitution, no federal investigation, just rebuild if you can. With what? Trauma and prayer? The wealth that would have gone into college educations, business expansions, property portfolios, political power, all of that got rerouted straight into white hands. Wealth doesn't disappear, it transfers. Erasure, how to bury a massacre. Now here's where it gets surgical. You don't just steal, you sanitize. For the US, decades. Tulsa schools didn't teach this. Not a paragraph, not a footnote. Black survivors were told, let it go. Don't stir up trouble. Don't upset the white folks. White Tulsans were told nothing. Journalists who tried to write about it, ignored, silenced, or labeled agitators. City officials began to geo-destroy records. Police logs disappeared. Official documents lost in a flood or misplaced in storage. That's not negligence, that's obstruction. Think about this. From 1921 to roughly the late 1990s, you could go through American history books and never see Tulsa Massacre, Greenwood, Black Wall Street. You'd see race riots, plural, generic, blurred. Both sides clashed. Violence broke out. Passive voice is the language of cover-ups. Even the name was manipulated. They called it the Mediast Tulsa Race Riot. And for decades. Why is that important? Because riot language was used to void insurance claims, avoid federal intervention, frame black people as co-conspirators in their own destruction. Change the word. Change the liability. Memory politics. Who gets to remember? Survivors weren't just silenced. They were gaslit. Imagine watching your neighborhood bombed, then growing old in the same city while people act like it never happened. Children ask questions. Elders shut down, not because they forgot, because they understood the danger of remembering out loud. You live long enough in a system like that, and you start to doubt your own story. That's what they wanted, because if there is no memory, there is no claim, no demand, no lawsuit, no reparations. The less you know, the more they keep. Stolen innovations. They didn't just burn buildings. Let's talk about what Black Wall Street really was. It wasn't just black people with money. It was black people with systems. Greenwood had black-owned banks, black-owned newspapers, black-owned bus systems, black doctors, lawyers, theaters, schools, hotels. That's not random success. That's infrastructure, a parallel economy, a living blueprint for self-sufficient black power inside a hostile country. You know how dangerous that looked to white supremacy? You had black folks circulating the dollar multiple times inside the community, controlling their own narratives via press, building capital without white intermediaries. That's not prosperity. That's a threat model. So they did what empires always do: destroy the lab, steal the research. Because those systems, they didn't just vanish. White developers studied black business models. White banks learned from black circulation patterns. White city planners watched how black communities organized space, housing, and commerce. You think it's a coincidence that urban renewal, highway construction, zoning laws later became tools to cut through thriving black districts in cities nationwide? Greenwood was a test case, a warning, a prototype of what to do with black success. First, envy it, then attack it, then copy it. then deny it ever existed. Theft of the future. They didn't just steal what Black Wall Street had, they stole what it was becoming. You had black kids growing up seeing black lawyers arguing cases, black women running businesses, black doctors owning clinics, black architects shaping skylines that does something to your imagination. You walk different when you see yourself in power every day. The massacre wasn't just physical, it was psychological warfare. Destroy the environment that normalizes black excellence, and you shrink the horizon for the next generation. Now zoom out. If Greenwood had been allowed to grow, it could have birthed national black banks, it could have funded civil rights movements with real capital, it could have produced tech, media, and political dynasties. Instead, we get decades of poverty statistics. Pathology studies on black communities, and white scholars asking, why can't they just pull themselves up? Because every time we built a ladder, they burned the building. Why the erasure matters now. Some people say, it was 100 years ago, why dig it up? Because the crime scene is still paying dividends, just not to us. The land still exists. The city still collects taxes. White families still benefit from property and businesses acquired after the ash settled. Insurance companies that denied claims still operate, still profit. Meanwhile, survivors and their descendants are told, too late, too complicated, too long ago. But look at the pattern. When it's time to collect debt from black folks, they go back generations. Student loans, child support, old tickets, old warrants. When it's time to pay a debt to black folks, suddenly time is a problem. Now we're going to track the money, we're going to name names, and we're going to ask, if the wealth from a crime is still alive, how dare you declare the justice for that crime dead? Follow the fire. Because when white supremacy commits a crime that big, it doesn't just burn bodies, it burns paper, it burns records, it burns proof. Let's move. Evidence. The crime scene they tried to clean Tulsa, 1921. The numbers alone are an indictment. 35 square blocks destroyed, as many as 300 black people murdered, over 1,200 homes burned, at least 191 businesses wiped out. But look what didn't happen. No real arrests of white rioters, no mass prosecutions, no restitution, no insurance payouts. And that's not an accident, that's policy. Insurance companies literally wrote it down. They refused to pay because the destruction was labeled a riot. Read that again. A white mob invades a black neighborhood, burns it, loots it, kills people, and the system rebrands it as a riot so they don't have to pay. That's not just racism, that's financial engineering. Receipts? Survivor businesses like the Dreamland Theater and the Williams Confectionery sued their insurers. Courts backed the companies. Claims denied. Wealth vaporized. White-owned insurers walked away clean, pockets full of black premiums. The city wasn't innocent either. Tulsa passed new zoning laws after the massacre. Building codes, fire codes, height restrictions. Suddenly, to rebuild in Greenwood, you needed more money, more materials, more compliance. Translation: we burned your house, and now we're going to make it more expensive to stand it back up. The city literally tried to block black folks from rebuilding on their own land. They wanted that land cheap. They wanted that location. They wanted that corridor. So when you hear racial violence, understand this was also a land grab. White mobs did the dirty work. White institutions did the paperwork. White wealth did the collecting. And the evidence? It's in what's missing. No comprehensive death records, no full accounting of property loss, mass graves rumored, not mapped, documents lost, misplaced, never filed. When the crime is that big, the absence of evidence is evidence. Somebody cleaned the scene. Erasure. How do you delete a massacre? Step 1, rename the crime. Step 2, rewrite the story. Step 3, starve it of oxygen. The newspapers that helped light the match, they went quiet. The Tulsa Tribune, the same paper that ran the inflammatory headline about Dick Rowland and practically invited white men to do something. Later, the edition with that front page just disappears from the archives, gone, like it never existed. Is that a coincidence or a cleanup job? The official narrative became sanitized, race riot, unfortunate disorder. Both sides to blame. Both sides. One side had planes dropping explosives. One side had deputized white men with guns. One side had police handing out weapons and looking away. The other side had homes, businesses, and a right to exist. But in textbooks, Silence. For decades, black folks who survived were told, don't talk about it, don't stir it up, don't make trouble. Teachers in Oklahoma taught generations of white children nothing about Black Wall Street. Not a page, not a paragraph. Some black families didn't even tell their own kids, not because they didn't remember, because they were afraid of retaliation, afraid of losing jobs, afraid the state would come again. So the trauma went underground. The story turned into whispers. Something happened. Back then, you don't want to know. That's what erasure looks like from the top down and the bottom up. From the top, government commissions delayed for decades. No serious investigation until the late 1990s. A whole century almost passed before Oklahoma even admitted what happened. From the bottom, survivors forced into silence to survive the next day. Grief with no courtroom, loss with no ledger. Erasure isn't just forgetting, it's enforced forgetting. And here's the dark psychology of it. If you erase the story, you erase the claim. If there was no massacre, there is no theft. If there is no theft, there is no debt. That's not ignorance, that's strategy. Stolen innovations, they didn't just steal land. Let's talk about what else they burned. Not just property, not just houses, not just money. They burned prototypes, they burned blueprints, they burned black futures. Greenwood wasn't just black people with businesses. It was a laboratory. Doctors, lawyers, accountants, engineers, entertainers, real estate developers, inventors. You had black surgeons running modern hospitals in 1921. Black-owned newspapers controlling their own narrative. Black entrepreneurs running multi-story office buildings, investment firms, transit-adjacent real estate. This was a model, a working prototype of black economic independence inside a white supremacist nation. And that is exactly what made it dangerous. Because if Greenwood worked, it meant Jim Crow's lie was exposed. The lie that black people were incapable, inferior, dependent. Greenwood said, we don't need you to survive. We don't need you to validate us. We can run a city inside your city. So what do you do with a model that proves your whole system is a fraud? You destroy the model. Then you destroy the memory of the model. Then you quietly steal the ideas from the model. Think about it. Black real estate syndicates in Greenwood were pooling capital, buying blocks, and reinvesting profits back into the community. Later, white developers and banks used similar models, with federal backing and redlining to keep black people out. Black professionals lived, worked, and circulated money within walking distance. Later, white planners called this walkable mixed-use districts and sell it as innovation. Black newspapers in Greenwood curated community information, business ads, and political education. Later, white-owned media corporations centralized that power and gatekeep whose stories get told. They didn't just steal land, they stole designs. And when you erase the source, you get to claim the innovation as your own. Urban planning, community banking, cooperative economics, localized supply chains. Greenwood was doing all of that in the early 1900s. But when white America tells the story of innovation, they skip from robber barons to Silicon Valley, from Rockefellers to tech bros. No Black Wall Street in the middle. That gap, that's the theft. The lineage of looting. Follow the pattern. Enslaved Africans build the economy. No wages, no equity. Reconstruction. Black folks begin accumulating land and capital. White terror, lynching, and policy push them off that land. Early 1900s. Black business districts rise. Wilmington, Rosewood, East St. Louis, Tulsa. White mobs burn them. 1930s, 1960s. Federal policy, redlining, highway construction, urban renewal, bulldozes what's left of black wealth centers. After that, white developers roll in, rebrand the same land as revitalized, up and coming, historic districts. Tulsa fits this script perfectly. Black people build something out of nothing. White rage destroys it. White institutions refuse to pay. White developers later circle back and profit off the ashes. And then they teach your children that black people are bad with money. That's the psychological warfare. Commit the robbery. Blame the victim for being broke. Why the erasure matters now? Because the money from that crime is still moving. The insurers that didn't pay, they reinvested. They grew. They merged. They turned black premiums into white generational wealth. The land that was cleared, it didn't vanish. It shifted owners. It sat underpriced until the right moment. Then it became part of a white-controlled tax base. The banks that denied loans to black survivors but financed white rebuilding, they multiplied their power. So when you see white neighborhoods with stable property values, white families with old money, white institutions with century-long endowments, understand, some of that respectable wealth is laundered massacre money. And the erasure, that's the laundering detergent. If nobody remembers the original crime, the money looks clean. We're not done. We've looked at the evidence. We've seen the erasure. We've named the stolen innovations. Next, we're going to drill down into numbers. What did Black Wall Street actually produce? What was stolen in today's dollars? And what would Black America look like if massacres like Tulsa had never happened? Because once you put a price tag on the theft, sorry stops being enough, and will do better starts sounding like an insult. Let's put receipts on the table. They didn't just burn a neighborhood, they destroyed an economic model that worked too well. Evidence. The crime scene they tried to clean start with numbers, because numbers don't care about feelings. Tulsa's Greenwood District, early 1900s. Over 35 square blocks of black-owned land. More than Midanzai's 200 homes burned. At least 191 black businesses. 2 newspapers. 2 theaters. 1 hospital. 11 rooming houses. 4 hotels. 31 restaurants. 8 doctors. 2 dentists. 3 grocery stores. A public library. Black money circulated 36 times before leaving the community. Today, in many black neighborhoods, it doesn't even make it one full cycle. On May 30th, 1921, a black teen, Dick Rowland, allegedly assaulted a white woman in an elevator. No proof, no conviction, just a rumor. White mobs armed up. Black veterans from World War I showed up to protect Rowland from a lynching. Tension snapped. From May 31 to June 1st, 1921, white mobs looted, burned, and murdered. Planes dropped incendiaries from the sky. Yes, planes. This was an airstrike on U.S. soil against U.S. citizens. Eyewitnesses said bodies were thrown into the river. Others said they were dumped into mass graves. The Red Cross estimated 300 dead. The official number, much lower, conveniently low. Insurance claims, over 1,400 filed, totaling more than $1.8 million in 1921 dollars. That's over $25 million today, depending on how you calculate it. Almost all denied. Why? Because of 3 words they love to hide behind. Riot exclusion clauses. Translation: if white people destroy your life because they hate you, we don't owe you a dime. So black families who did everything right, saved, bought land, opened shops, built wealth, were told, you get nothing. And the city? Instead of helping them rebuild, Tulsa officials tried to use the destruction as an excuse to steal the land. They proposed new building codes that would make it too expensive for black residents to rebuild on their own property. They wanted to turn Greenwood into an industrial district. They didn't just burn Black Wall Street. They tried to zone it out of existence. Erasure. How you kill a story without touching a body. Now here's where it gets darker. Killing people is one thing. Killing memory? That's a different kind of warfare. For decades, Tulsa schools didn't teach this. Not a paragraph, not a footnote, nothing. White families didn't talk about it. Black families whispered about it. Trauma turned into silence. Silence turned into gaps. Gaps turned into, it couldn't have been that bad. City leaders buried documents. Police records went missing. Newspapers from those days lost issues that covered the massacre. The language changed too. It wasn't called a massacre. They called it a riot. That's not just semantics. Riot makes it sound mutual, like both sides just went crazy, like it was chaos, not organized terror. But when one side has planes, the other side has pistols, and only one side loses everything, that's not a riot. That's a massacre. And that word choice mattered. Riot let insurance companies deny claims. Riot let the city dodge responsibility. Riot let America pretend this was just unrest, not policy. Even the survivors were gaslit. Old black men and women who watched their homes burn were told, that was a long time ago, move on. Move on to what? From what? From generational wealth being vaporized overnight? From property deeds turned into ashes? From kids watching their fathers shot in the streets? Here's the twisted part. By erasing the story, they stole more than land. They stole context. Because if you don't know your people built a Wall Street, you start to believe the lie that black people just can't handle money. If you don't know your people built hospitals, you start to believe black communities don't value health. If you don't know your people own newspapers, you start to believe we're just consumers, not narrators. Erasure is not forgetting. It's being taught not to remember. Stolen innovations. When genius gets rebranded, Greenwood wasn't just about wealth, it was about systems. Black folks in Tulsa were running. Cooperative economics before group economics became a buzzword. Community lending before community development banking was a thing. Local. Investment before buy black turned into a hashtag. They built vertical integration, black-owned suppliers, black-owned distributors, black-owned retailers, shared risk, informal credit networks, rotating savings, church-based support systems, social safety nets, mutual aid societies, fraternal orders, church charities. All the things business schools praise today, they were already doing it. But here's what happens in America. When black people innovate, the system either steals it, bans it, or buries it. Look at music, jazz, blues, rock, hip-hop. They demonize it first, then monetize it, then detach it from its creators. Same with Greenwood. The principles that made Black Wall Street work got stripped of their black origin, repackaged in white institutions, and sold back as new ideas. Community lending? Now it's called microfinance. Mutual aid? Now it's social entrepreneurship. Group economics? Now it's impact investing. But where's the chapter in the textbooks that says this model was perfected in black communities that white mobs destroyed? You won't see that, because if they admit that, they admit the truth. Black poverty is not a natural condition. It's a manufactured outcome. And Tulsa isn't an isolated event. It's a pattern. Wilmington, North Carolina, 1898. A successful black political and economic class. White supremacists staged a coup, burned black businesses, overthrew the local government, installed white rule. Rosewood, Florida, 1923, black town, lies about an assault, white mobs, massacre, town erased. Elaine, Arkansas, Colfax, Louisiana, East St. Louis, Chicago, Detroit. Every time black people built power, economic, political, or cultural, the system responded with violence, then amnesia. Violence to destroy the structure, amnesia to destroy the blueprint. So when people today say, why don't black people just build their own? The honest answer is, we did. Over and over, and you burned it, blocked it, zoned it out, redlined it, underfunded it, then pretended it never existed. The cost of a stolen blueprint. Imagine if Greenwood had been allowed to grow. Generational wealth from 1921 compounding for 100 years. Businesses franchised, banks expanded, insurance companies scaling nationwide, black venture capital before Silicon Valley. Imagine black-owned airlines, black-owned national hotel chains, black-owned media conglomerates that never had to beg for ad dollars or approval. Now multiply that by all the other Greenwoods that were killed off. We're not just talking about what was lost in one city. We're talking about an entire trajectory of black wealth and innovation that was deliberately rerouted. Instead of inherited capital, you get inherited trauma. Instead of property deeds, you get prison records. Instead of trust funds, you get start from scratch, every single generation. And then they have the nerve to call it a level playing field. But here's the thing about truth. Once it's out, it doesn't go back in the box. The evidence is there. The erasure is documented. The stolen innovations are visible in every new idea that smells a little too familiar. The question now is not, did this happen? The question is, what does justice look like when you can finally see the theft? Because once you understand what was taken, you stop asking for inclusion and start calculating what's owed. And that's where this story is headed next. They didn't just burn a neighborhood. They tried to burn the evidence. Let's start with the receipts. Because this isn't about vibes. It's about documents, deeds, dollar signs. Evidence. Theft in black and white Tulsa, 1921. After the smoke cleared, black survivors did what black people always do. They tried to rebuild. They went to courts, filed insurance claims, presented deeds, showed proof. One black man had a policy that explicitly covered riot and civil unrest. He did what any rational citizen would do. He filed a claim. The insurance company answered with a single line of poison. We are not liable because this was a Negro uprising. Understand the move. White mobs burned black property. White officials deputized them. White police either helped or stood down. Then white insurance companies said this wasn't us, this was you revolting. They turned black victimhood into black blame, on paper, in contracts, in legal language that would stand for decades. Most of those 1,000+ insurance claims denied, not because the damage wasn't real, but because the system wrote a magic phrase, riot exclusion, or worse, insurrection. Translation: we let them destroy you, now we'll make you pay for being destroyed. And it wasn't just insurance. Survivors came back to Greenwood to find their land rezoned, new city ordinances requiring expensive fireproof buildings, deadlines to rebuild that were impossible if you were just burned out, threats that if they didn't rebuild fast enough, the city would seize the land. That's not random, that's strategy. The city passed new building codes after the massacre, brick or concrete only, no cheap wood, no quick rebuild, and if you couldn't afford the new rules, your land could be condemned, transferred, taken. They didn't just burn black wealth, they laid legal traps around the ashes, and there's more. Banks lost records, title offices misplaced deeds, mortgages vanished, or were suddenly in dispute. Imagine, your home is burned, your shop is looted. You run for your life. You come back with your deed in hand, and the city says, strange, we can't find you in the system. That's not chaos, that's a financial lynching. The massacre was one day, the theft was policy, the robbery was paperwork, and that's why they tried so hard to bury the story. Erasure, how they buried a massacre. You'd think 35 square blocks burned, thousands displaced, hundreds killed would be in every history book. It wasn't. For almost a century, Tulsa schools didn't teach it. Oklahoma didn't talk about it. America pretended it never happened. How do you erase something that big? Simple. You control the narrative. You control the archives. You control the fear. Newspapers that helped spark the violence, some issues just disappeared. The infamous front page of the Tulsa Tribune, the one with the nabbed Negro for attacking girl in elevator headline, gone from the archives, missing from bound volumes, like someone took a razor blade to history. Who removes a front page from a newspaper archive? Not some random kid, that's institutional. City leaders called it a riot, not a massacre. Words matter. Riot sounds mutual, messy, chaotic. Massacre sounds one-sided, organized, criminal. Riot lets insurance companies walk away. Riot lets the city shrug. Riot lets white citizens say, well, both sides were wrong. Meanwhile, black survivors were threatened into silence. Some were told, talk about this and you'll be killed. Others just understood the code. You live here. You keep your head down. So they swallowed the story. It lived as whispers, as family secrets, as the night the white folks came. Grandparents told fragments. Children learned to read the pain behind the pause. But the official record? Blank. No school lessons, no monuments, no public apologies, no reparations. You know what it means to erase a crime this big? It means you're not just hiding history. You're hiding liability, because once you admit what happened, you have to answer the next question. So what are you going to do about it? So they buried it. They paved over it. They built highways through it. Literally, urban renewal, the most polite phrase for surgical black displacement. Highways cut through black neighborhoods across America, Detroit, New Orleans, Miami, LA, and yes, Tulsa. Interstates didn't just happen to go through black communities. They were aimed there because that land was cheap, because those people had no political shield, because their history was already being erased and the country moved on. Acted like black poverty was just bad choices, acted like black communities just failed, never mentioning the bombs, the bullets, the denial letters, the zoning laws, the bulldozers. They didn't just erase the story of Black Wall Street, they erased the proof that America owes a debt. And while they were erasing, they were also stealing something else. Stolen innovations. They took more than money. When people talk about Black Wall Street, they talk money. Businesses, banks, doctors, lawyers. But Greenwood wasn't just rich, it was innovative. Think about what it meant for black people, barely one generation out of slavery, to build an ecosystem like that. Black-owned movie theaters, black newspapers, black pilots, black hotels for black travelers long before civil rights was a legal phrase. They weren't just surviving racism, they were designing around it. Segregation said you can't use our banks, so they built banks. Segregation said you can't stay in our hotels, so they built luxury hotels. Segregation said you can't shop here, so they built entire commercial districts where a dollar could circulate dozens of times before it ever left black hands. That's not just entrepreneurship, that's systems thinking, that's economic engineering. Now ask yourself, what happens when you burn down a lab of black innovation? You don't just destroy wealth, you destroy prototypes, you destroy models, you destroy proof. Proof that black communities, when left alone, can build thriving, self-sustaining economies. Proof that we just need access was never the whole story, because they built greatness without access and got punished for it. Imagine if Greenwood had been allowed to scale, franchise, replicate. Imagine black Wall Streets in every major city by 1950. Imagine the compounding effect over 100 years. Black venture capital, black shipping companies, black insurance firms that didn't deny claims, black universities with Greenwood money behind them, black tech long before Silicon Valley even had a name. That's what was stolen. Not just barbershops and cafes, not just houses and jewelry, but trajectories, networks, blueprints. And here's the darkest part. While black innovation was being bombed, white America was quietly copying the playbook. The idea of self-contained communities, of intentional circulation of dollars, of vertically integrated businesses. Look at the suburbs. Look at the way white ethnic enclaves built wealth. Look at how government-backed loans and highways supercharged white neighborhoods while black ones were redlined, flooded, or uprooted. They killed a black model and then subsidized the white version. Black people created Buy Black decades before it was a hashtag. They created community-based healthcare before it was a think piece. They created mutual aid before philanthropy departments were a thing. But who got the credit for innovation? Not Greenwood, not Black Wall Street, because you can't credit what you've erased. And that's the game. Erase the crime, erase the victim, then inherit their ideas, their culture, their style, their genius, and call it your own. So when we talk about justice, we're not just talking about land back. We're talking about stolen futures back, stolen experiments, stolen proofs of concept. Because if the world had seen in real time that black economies could dominate without white approval, the mythology of white superiority would have cracked in 1921. So they cracked buildings instead, cracked skulls, cracked safes, cracked open a community and poured its contents into the fire. Then they tried to pretend it never happened. But once you see the pattern, the evidence, the erasure, the stolen innovations, you can't unsee it. And you start asking different questions, not why are black communities struggling, but how much did they lose? How much was taken? How much was copied? And the most dangerous question of all, if we can finally count the theft, what does the bill look like? We're going there next, into the math, into the numbers, into the debt that never stopped accruing, even when the history books went silent. First, the evidence, because they swore there was none. They told you it was a riot. They told you it was mob violence. They told you it was unclear what happened. A lie, stacked on lie, on top of a smoking crater. Let's walk through what they buried. Evidence, the paper trail. They hoped you'd never follow Greenwood wasn't some rumor. It was documented, measured, taxed, counted. City directories listed black doctors, lawyers, dentists, realtors. Bank ledgers recorded black deposits. Insurance policies were written on black homes and black businesses. Property deeds had black names printed in ink that doesn't fade just because white folks get uncomfortable. In 1921, black people in Greenwood owned dozens of grocery stores, 2 newspapers, multiple hotels, a hospital, a public library, a school system, law offices, real estate firms, tailors, barbershops, cafes, theaters. They weren't renting permission. They owned land. They owned buildings. They owned inventory. They owned their labor. Then May 31st to June 1st, 1921 hit. And suddenly, all that ownership became liability in white eyes. White mobs didn't just show up angry. They showed up organized. Some were deputized by the city. Some were handed weapons from police stations. Some were given the green light to clean up the Negro problem. Eyewitnesses said planes flew overhead, dropping incendiaries, firing rifles, turning Greenwood into a war zone. Think about that. Black citizens who had just fought in World War I came home to build a thriving economy. Then the same government that drafted them watched planes drop fire on their houses, on U.S. soil, against U.S. citizens, for the crime of being successful while black. The aftermath? Over 1,200 homes burned, 35 city blocks destroyed, hospitals, schools, churches, businesses gone. The official death toll? 36. The real death toll? Hundreds, possibly more than 300. Bodies dumped in mass graves, bodies thrown in the river, bodies never claimed because people were too afraid to ask. You don't erase a place that big by accident. You erase it because the evidence threatens the story you've been selling. How they erased it. The quiet genocide of memory. After the smoke lifted, the second destruction began. Not of buildings, of narrative. First move, call it a riot. If it's a riot, then it's mutual. If it's mutual, then it's complicated. If it's complicated, then it's nobody's fault. If it's nobody's fault, then nobody owes you a damn thing. Newspapers that had fanned the flames with headlines like, "To lynch Negro tonight," suddenly caught amnesia. Articles disappeared from archives. Editions went missing. Microfilm couldn't be located. Records were lost in a flood, a fire, a move. Funny how the same people who saved Confederate letters from 1863 lost entire front pages from 1921. City leaders rewrote the story. Police reports minimized white aggression. Insurance companies called it civil disturbance and invoked riot clauses to deny black claims. Let's be clear. Black folks filed for what they were owed. They turned in claims for burned homes, destroyed businesses, stolen inventory. They had receipts, they had policies, they had proof. Insurance companies said no payout, riot exclusion. So white terror gets labeled riot. Then the label is used as a legal shield to block generational wealth from being rebuilt. That's not just racism. That's strategy. That's policy level theft. Next step, silence the survivors. Black parents didn't tell their children what happened, not because they forgot, because they wanted their children to live. Talking could get you killed. Talking could get you fired. Talking could get your new home burned down again. So a whole generation grew up in Tulsa, walking on the ashes of Black Wall Street with no idea what was under their feet. White teachers never mentioned it. Textbooks skipped it. Local history classes jumped from statehood to oil boom to urban renewal, like Greenwood never existed. You had elders who saw planes dropping bombs on their neighborhood, and their grandchildren only heard about it from a TV show 100 years later. That's not ignorance. That's design. Urban renewal, the second wave of destruction. Here's the part they really don't like you to connect. After the massacre, black survivors did something wild. They rebuilt. By the mid-1920s, Greenwood had businesses again, shops, theaters, homes. Not as big as before, but they refused to die. So the system adjusted. Zoning laws, building codes, highway projects. The city tried to block rebuilding right after the massacre by passing new codes that made it nearly impossible for black homeowners to reconstruct on their own land without massive costs. Black folks fought it in court and won. They rebuilt anyway, so white power just played the long game. Decades later, urban renewal came. Highways cut straight through black neighborhoods, including Greenwood. I-244 didn't just happen. It was drawn, chosen, approved. You know how they pick routes, studies, maps, committees. They knew exactly where that concrete would land, right on top of black history, right on top of black property. So even the partial comeback of Black Wall Street got strangled, choked out by asphalt and eminent domain. Now, when people drove through Tulsa, they didn't see a black business district. They saw ramps and exits, concrete where black wealth used to stand. You don't need to burn a neighborhood twice, once with fire, once with paperwork. Stolen innovations, what Black Wall Street proved, and why it had to go. Here's the dangerous truth. Greenwood was not just a tragedy, it was a proof of concept. It proved that black people could build a self-sustaining economy. Black professionals could serve black communities at a high level. Black dollars could circulate multiple times before leaving the neighborhood. Black ownership could turn ex-slaves into landlords, investors, and industrialists in a single generation. That proof was the problem, because the whole white supremacist economy runs on one core lie. You can't make it without us. Greenwood said, we already are. You had black-owned newspapers controlling the narrative, black-owned banks controlling the capital, black-owned real estate controlling the land, black-owned businesses controlling the supply chain for black consumption. That's vertical integration. That's economic sovereignty. That's nation-level thinking on a neighborhood scale. You think nobody noticed that? Oil-rich Oklahoma, Jim Crow South, white elites watching black folks move like a small nation inside their city? They noticed. Now add this. Many of the residents of Greenwood had come from land-owning black communities, or from families that had once been enslaved but quickly acquired skills, trades, and property. They were experimenting, building business models, creating financial systems, designing social structures that could have scaled. Imagine if Greenwood had been allowed to grow for 50 more years. Black-owned insurance conglomerates, black-owned transportation lines, black-owned manufacturing hubs, black venture capital before that phrase even existed. Instead, what do we get? A massacre, then a blackout, then a mystery. And while Black Wall Street burned, white businesses and white cities quietly absorbed black ideas. You see company towns built around industry. Greenwood was already doing community towns built around black spending power. You see white neighborhoods later branded as live work play districts. Greenwood had that energy before the marketing language existed. You see modern pushes for buy black, support black banks, black cooperative economics. Those are echoes, faint signals from a place they tried to delete. The innovation wasn't just in what they built, it was in how they thought. Group economics, circulating dollars internally, training the next generation into professions, not just jobs, using media, newspapers, to shape identity and protect interests. That's nation-building infrastructure on U.S. soil without U.S. permission. So they didn't just destroy buildings, they stole the blueprint, then told you you never had one. Evidence, erasure, stolen innovation. That's the pattern. Document it, destroy it, deny it, then quietly recycle the best parts without credit. And the cruelest twists? They made you doubt it ever happened, made you think you were obsessed with the past for even asking. But the land remembers, the elders remember, the missing money remembers, because wealth doesn't just vanish, it transfers. What was taken from Greenwood didn't evaporate, it moved into white banks, white pockets, white land titles, white institutions. And that's where we go next, into the numbers they never wanted you to run. And the bill that's still sitting on the table, accruing interest in silence. Start with this. In 1921, insurance companies paid out less than $2 million in claims for the Tulsa Massacre. But the estimated damage? Over $27 million in today's money. If you only count buildings, if you count businesses, inventory, equipment, cash, gold, cars, livestock, medical practices, legal offices, life insurance policies, and future earnings, you're looking at the equivalent of hundreds of millions. Some economists push it toward a billion, in modern value. That's not a riot. That's a transfer of wealth. Let's walk through it. Then, evidence, the ledger of theft. Before the bombs dropped, Greenwood wasn't just a black neighborhood, it was an ecosystem. 191 businesses on Greenwood Avenue alone. 2 newspapers, 30+ restaurants, 2 movie theaters, 24 grocery stores, a hospital, a public library, 11 rooming houses, 4 hotels, 31 barbershops and salons, law offices, medical practices, realtors, tailors, shoemakers, cafes, pool halls, cleaners, black doctors who didn't just treat black patients, black lawyers who didn't just represent black clients, money flowing in from white Tulsa too, because quality doesn't care about color. And the land? Black families weren't renting, they owned. Some bought land when it was worthless prairie, held it, developed it, built homes, built rental properties, built commercial buildings, land deeds, titles, mortgages, insurance policies. All that is paper. And paper is where the crime shows its face, because when the fires went out, the paper didn't burn, the records are still there. Tulsa County land records showing black-owned parcels before 1921, mysteriously in white hands after. Insurance policies held by black residents, denied with a single phrase, riot exclusion clause. See, the companies had it written in the fine print. If the damage is caused by a riot, we owe you nothing. Guess who got to define riot? The same system that armed white mobs deputized them and watched them burn a city. The state of Oklahoma didn't declare it a massacre, didn't call it a pogrom, didn't call it terrorism. They called it a race riot, on purpose, to slam the door shut on reparations in real time. So, homes destroyed, Businesses destroyed, inventory gone, cash stolen, gold and jewelry looted, titles lost, claims denied, and then the city tried to pass new fire ordinances, codes that made it nearly impossible for black residents to rebuild on their own land. You need brick, not wood. You need this standard, that standard. You need money you no longer have. That's not just violence, that's policy. Violence clears the land. Policy keeps it cleared. This is how you steal a city and still sleep at night. The accounting they won't do. Let's talk math, because America likes numbers when it's time to talk about black deficits, crime numbers, welfare numbers, education gaps. But when it's time to count what was taken, suddenly the calculators break. Take one example. A black-owned building in Greenwood in 1921 might have been worth $5,000 then. Adjust for inflation, about $80,000, $90,000 now. But that's the lazy math. Real math says, what if that building had stayed in the family, rented, refinanced, leveraged to pay for college, used to start another business, passed down again, compounded over 100 years, through booms, through oil wealth, through urban expansion? That one building could easily represent hundreds of thousands, Max Weiss, in lost generational wealth. Now multiply that by hundreds of homes, hundreds of businesses, dozens of commercial buildings, land that later became prime real estate. You're not looking at a one-time loss. You're looking at a stolen economic trajectory. And here's the coldest part. That wealth didn't just disappear. It moved. When black property is destroyed and black claims are denied, the value of the surrounding white property rises. White investors buy cheap land where black homes once stood. White developers profit from the land black families cleared and built up. White institutions expand. The line goes from black labor, black ownership, black prosperity to black labor, white violence, white ownership. They call it urban development, but the ledger calls it theft. Child search. Erasure. How you hide a crime scene. Now, if you pull off a crime that big, you've got two choices. Pay the bill or hide the evidence. America chose the second. Ask most people born before the 1990s if they learned about Black Wall Street in school. You'll hear the same answer. No, never, not once. Tulsa didn't talk about it. Oklahoma didn't talk about it. America definitely didn't talk about it. The local white press that helped ignite the massacre. They lost archives. Articles vanished. Police records went missing. City documents got misplaced. Witness statements buried, literally and figuratively. There were rumors of mass graves, black bodies dumped like trash. For decades, nobody in power wanted to look. Why? Because a massacre acknowledged is a debt acknowledged. So they rebranded it race riot. Unfortunate incident. Tragic disturbance. Language as bleach, scrubbing the blood out of the story. In classrooms, if it was mentioned at all, it was a single line. No photos, no maps, no numbers, no names. Imagine living in Tulsa, walking over the ground where your ancestors were burned out and never being told what happened there. That's not ignorance, that's design. The survivors, they remembered, they told their children. But trauma has a way of teaching silence. Talk too loud about what happened? Maybe it happens again. So the story stayed in living rooms and church basements, not in textbooks, not in city tours, not in American mythology. And when a story doesn't get told, the world assumes it never happened. Erasure. Stolen innovations. What they took besides land. America loves to say, if black people just built their own, they'd be fine. Greenwood did exactly that. And what did America do? Burned it, then erased it, then took its blueprint. Look closely at what Greenwood was. Black-owned banks and lending circles, black insurance associations, black doctors networks, black lawyers forming legal ecosystems, black realtors organizing land acquisition, black educators running private schools and training programs. These weren't just businesses, they were ye systems. Systems of group economics, vertical integration, community credit, mutual aid. Sound familiar? Today, they call it community banking, localism, impact investing, innovation districts, walkable mixed-use communities. Greenwood was all of that in 1921, before think tanks, before TED Talks, before venture capital discovered the idea of community ecosystems. You think nobody was watching? White Tulsa saw black people running a self-sustaining high circulation economy, money changing hands 10, 15, 20 times before it ever left the community. Black architects designing, black contractors building, black professionals serving, black consumers choosing black first. That's not just pride, that's power. You can't dominate people who don't need you, so they broke the system, but they kept the ideas. White developers later built their own districts. White banks used the same group credit principles, just locked behind membership and race. White cities adopted zoning and planning concepts that looked suspiciously like what black communities had already done, without ever crediting where they saw it work, and the language flipped. When black people do it, it's separatist, it's insular, it's threatening. When white people do the same thing, it's entrepreneurial, it's innovative, it's revitalization. Greenwood's genius got stolen twice, first in flames, then in silence. Why they had to erase it. If the story of Black Wall Street stayed alive, it would blow up 3 American myths at once. 1. Black people are poor because they don't work hard. Greenwood worked, harder than hard, built wealth under segregation, under Jim Crow, under open hatred, then had it ripped away. 2. Violence is a response to black criminality. Greenwood wasn't looting white neighborhoods. White mobs crossed the tracks, invaded black space and burned it down. The crime was black success. 3. Reparations are unrealistic. When you can trace land titles, insurance claims, business records, city ordinances, the bill isn't abstract, it's itemized. That's the danger of the full story. It doesn't just ask for sympathy, it demands accounting, and America hates accounting when it owes, so they tried to bury it. But here's the problem with burying truth. It doesn't rot like bodies. It waits, in records, in ledgers, in deeds, in family stories, in the gaps where whole communities should be. And now, a century later, the evidence is crawling back out of the ground, literally, as they dig for mass graves, and financially, as economists, lawyers, and activists start to run the numbers out loud. This isn't about nostalgia, it's about a crime scene that's still active. Because if the wealth was never returned, if the policies were never reversed, if the beneficiaries still hold what was taken, then the massacre never really ended. It just changed form. And that brings us to the ugliest question on the table. Not just what was stolen, but who's still spending it?